Okay, there's a lot of talk about the circular economy, but in 2002 there was a book called Cradle to Cradle, which is sort of the point of reference for a lot of people who are considering the circular economy, written by Professor Michael Braungart and Bill McDonough. And that book's been an inspiration to a lot of people, and some people are really running with the whole concept of Cradle to Cradle. And so what we're going to do now is dwell on with a couple of speakers, this whole idea of what cradle to cradle could be for the production of stuff, things. So, drawing on a wealth of experience in the world of closed-loop systems, we're going to have Ignasi Kubina, who's Director of Eco-Intelligent Growth, and Owen, who's lead consultant for Workspace Strategy, JLL. But before that, they're part of a group called 540 World, and we're going to get Shalene Church from 540 World just to explain what that's all about. So Shalene, if you could start.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Shalene Church. I'm an interiors architect. I have a long history I'm about 95 years old. I'm looking good today, good hair day. We have a company called 540 World, which is based in London, and we have partners in Scotland. But we have a global collaboration with a number of partners who are all Cradle to Cradle certified. Now, I'm not going to be talking about Cradle to Cradle certified specifically today, because that's well covered by the following speakers. But 540 World exists. It's on stand E110, which is just at the bar. And the whole point of that is to provide business services and specialist consulting to companies who want authentic, responsible, sustainable, circular, and safe products. Now, there's a lot of companies out there that we know that call themselves sustainable, which is not a protected title. They put leaves on their tins and they call themselves eco, and you'll know that that's not really true. But the gold standard now in holistic, rigorous certification is Cradle to Cradle. And we are going to, as I said, talk about that a little bit more. So 540 World has two key functions. One is to create awareness. So if anybody needs information, as I said, specialist information, consultancy presentations on Cradle to Cradle materials and services, we are your gateway or bridge company for that. And secondly, we are your go-to company if you want to specify or procure materials that are in the UK and globally. We obviously are a global organization, but we have materials that are now provided or manufactured or finished in the UK. So we focus on the UK, but we have our partners globally, so we can help you interact with those companies too. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. So, now we'll have Owen, if you could join us on the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Owen Zacharias, and I work with JLL, leading the workplace team from out of the Netherlands in Amsterdam. I'm going to showcase a project today that is in execution. It's the world's first full-service cradle-to-cradle inspired office park. It's a project that was started a number of years ago. It's still ongoing in its construction, and it really embraces a number of the both design techniques and the execution of cradle-to-cradle. In my previous life, before joining JLL, I was head of sustainability, innovation, and workplace for the developer of the project itself. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in the project from day one all the way through until about last year of April. And we'll show you a little bit about how we pulled it off, and more importantly, from a developer standpoint, showing some of the economics and the numbers behind how we started getting these types of solutions embedded into the project. And then I'm going to hand over to Ignasi Kubina, who is a longtime collaborator, a very good friend of mine, and I'm just thrilled to be his warm-up and lead-in. So without further ado, let's get going. So To set the context, I would start to say that in terms of construction and real estate, I'm a big fan of this statement. I would start to say if we look around and we're displeased about the state of affairs in the built environment community, well, that's because in large part process is really what's making this, is responsible for this. In terms of an industry, we are quite siloed. Every single real estate project still to this date is an incident, which makes it very challenging for us to start really testing new technologies, new innovative applications and solutions, learning from what we end up uncovering and then applying those into future buildings. So for me as a developer and now as a strategic consultant for developers and occupants, process is really one of the things that we go through. And what is your process to pull one of these off? And to set the stage, again, as I mentioned, I come from the Netherlands, and this is our city hall here. If we look back at a little bit of what our construction community was, it was really a craft. It was really something where buildings were executed with purpose. They took time. Financing was procured over a long term. And we pulled off these structures in a community and in an environment where innovation happened very slowly. But if we look at what happens today, and primarily after World War II, our entire industry has really shifted to a model of mass production. Instead of talking about constructing structures, we talk about square meters. It's a manufacturing of square meters to put onto the market. It is an investment vehicle like never before. And so in that, what we start to see is that we are building still in our methods and our process of construction. We're building structures with a useful life anticipated for 60, 80, 100 years. Meanwhile, the pace of change has never been quicker today. What we figure out today can easily be obsolete in terms of a technology or solution in a much quicker time period. So you see this disconnect from the way that we build and what our economies require. And if you look at this, then the inflexibility of those structures, you can really see that it's like driving almost 180 kilometers an hour in the fog. We're bound to make accidents and have mistakes, or make mistakes and have accidents. So, and that's setting up a little bit of what we did. That was kind of the world that we were looking to address and change. So our project is Park 2020. It's the world's first full-service cradle-to-cradle inspired office park. It was not a single building. It was a collection of buildings around centralized infrastructure. It is an open park. You can visit it. It's located very close, about 10 minutes from Schiphol International Airport outside of Amsterdam in the community of Hoofddorp. And there are some structures that you can walk in as well. So here you see the footprint of the structure. The total is about 92,000 square meters. That's about 920, if you do the rough calculations, it's about 920,000 square feet. There's about 5,000 square meters dedicated to amenities to make it a full service park, and a large hotel of 17,000. The entire project investment volume was about 354 million euros. That was financed in a way of a joint equity proposition by the developer itself. A construction company was an equity partner in that project, so we had from the very beginning a joint venture between the construction company executing, the developer, and a private equity company as well. Looking at the numbers itself of what ended up happening, and we're very transparent about the results of the project. The project was 1.4% under budget as to date. The budgets were all constructed around market norms, so it is a market-driven business case. Right now, at the time that we started kicking off, construction costs could carry roughly 1,000 to 1,200 euros a square meter in construction costs. We were building at 1,100 euros a square meter, so we were right in the average of what the market carrying costs were per square meter in production costs. The exit yields outperformed the market by about 40 to 80 basis points, meaning that they were very profitable. These were at the time of building, and I will say it was between 2006 and today, so this was one of the only active ongoing projects in the worst economic crisis that the Netherlands had ever experienced. we were staying quite busy, and the rent levels were outperforming Class A commercial real estate by about 15 to 30%, and that was right across the street. That was not necessarily in a circular vicinity of the project. It was directly across the street. What we end up seeing also critical for us was we measure the well-being and the performance of the people inside the buildings, and we had a constant user satisfaction rate of over 95% of occupants of the buildings, which is very important because happy people renew their leases, which then help to secure cash flows in the long term. As a developer, that's what we're looking for. When we started the project, we had a hurdle rate that we had promised the equity provider as 10% ROI. The average ROI that we realized was over 13%, so we were outperforming what our current, our starting gate returns were anticipated for. And right now, as of today, they have realized roughly about 70 to 80 euros per square meter of net residual value, and that is over deconstruction costs. So if we take a look at what demolition costs would be to blast the building apart, then you take deconstruction costs of what it would be to pull it apart piece by piece. From deconstruction costs, there is 70 to 80 euros per square meter of residual value of the building materials identified in the bill of lading, primarily through a materials banking strategy. And that represents a long-term strategy of about, or earn-out of about 125 to 130 euros per square meter. So that's a lot of numbers. Net result, this was probably the most profitable project that we were executing at the time. And as a result, we pulled off a number of these projects. But I think it's important to start with the numbers because as developers and equity providers, debt providers, this is what they're looking for in the very beginning. This is really how projects like this get pulled off. It's through the business case of showing how you can make a very healthy return. In terms of, okay, how were we going to get started from this? We elected to have a 5-step strategy. We looked at energy, we looked at water, we looked at biodiversity and materials. The 5th was people, and they were so incredibly important that in our minds that they had their entire own approach and specific way of executing performance with people. That was through something we called human-centered design and measuring the health, well-being, and performance far before the well building standard came out. This was in roughly around 2009, 2010, we started measuring that. You can read a couple case studies about this in the World Green Building Council's report. We had 2 structures that were in there. One of them was the Hirama-gebouw, or the Hirama building in Leiden, and one of them was the Plantronics building. After merging with Polycom, they're now Poly, which is at this project. At the very beginning, what's really important is to show that we have, I don't know if I can move this thing without obstructing it, but what's really important is that starting from a roadmap of how you progress from day one until what you have, most people will start today and what's my next step. In cradle-to-cradle constructions, it's really important that we actually start at the end. And one of the important elements is looking at what does 100% good look like. So what does success look like? And we started at the end. Again, when we started mapping this project out, it was about 2004, 2005. So there was a little bit of a slowdown in the market. And so initially we had projected that we would be free and clear and out of the project around 2018. And at the end, we said that this is what 100% good looks like in terms of materials, energy, water, and biodiversity. And we started backcasting to what the reality of today's world was. And what that did was that gave us not only what our next step should be, but also it kept us very focused on what the North Star of the project looked like. Because in terms of the economic climate, things always change. But as long as you know where you always want to be going to, then you can adjust accordingly to end up getting there. Looking at our energy strategy, one critical decision from the very beginning was that we elected to have only electricity. There was no gas at the park. That was a conscious decision from the very beginning, and that was so that no future investor that would own the asset could ever come off of the renewable strategy and move to fossil fuels. and each building is supplied by its own energy source. The max right now for on-site generation per building is about 25%. Construction professionals will know that it's very hard to generate 100 to 101% of your renewable energy from a surface area because of the intensity of consumption. So from the very beginning, we started buying in only 100% clean renewable energy. So that meant no combustion from local sources in the Netherlands that would supply all of the world. So we were always break even from the beginning. Later on in the project, after we had started making some money off of the buildings, we had built a logistics park about within 10 kilometers, and we just started blanketing all the rooftops of the logistics park, and we started doing net metering with the PV or the solar panels there, delivering money to the net because the investment capital came from Park 2020. Those returns were then attributed to Park 2020. And then I will also talk about a little bit of what we did on site in terms of our centralized storage. 100% of the cooling comes from that on-site program. 75% of the district heating that we had for the project comes from that. Again, 25% of the renewable power. What it looks like is this. So what we ended up doing was we started creating a centralized hot and cold storage system. And I think it's hot and cold storage. In Dutch, we call it a warmte-koude opslag or a VKO. And that was located right here in the center of the park. And every building is connected to that centralized system. It pulls we have a canal, of course it's Holland, so we have our own little canal in the park. And in the wintertime where they have frozen water, that water is pumped into the ground and stored. It serves as the cooling for the building. In the summertime, the warmer water is pumped into the ground, sent to the building for heating, and then it only requires a heat pump to bring it up to the temperature that's needed to heat the building. And we use thermal mass and store that heating and cooling in the concrete and the steel framings of the buildings. It's a little bit of a slower heating and cooling system, but it's very stable in terms of its energy proposition. And I'll show you a little bit of how we ended up getting this. We had to build it before we had even one tenant at the park. Thing cost us 5.6 million euros. So close your eyes and transport with me back to trying to meet with an equity provider and say we need over 5.5 million euros to build a centralized infrastructure before we have any cash flows. And they thought we were crazy in the beginning, but we sketched out the following business case for them, and this is how it works. So we conducted a study, and because we had centralized it, it meant that we didn't need these types of systems in each building. That meant that the technical rooms were 3% smaller in each building. The real revenue stream is not off an energy system. We actually did that. We set it up as a separate business, and we sold it to an energy provider, made a healthy little profit off of it, but that was later. And so with a 3% reduction in your technical space, that doesn't mean the buildings are 3% smaller. It means your gross to net. So your lettable floor area versus the gross floor area is 3% better. So that means we earned 3% off of the real estate. Again, it cost 5.6 million euros. At the time of that investment, the rent was 210 euros per square meter. I take a very conservative cap rate at about 7%. And if we take, so what's the value of that 3%? 3% times 92,000 square meters, 2 minutes? Yeah? For 30 minutes? Okay. So the value of 92,000 square meters, 3%, at a 7% cap rate is 8 million euros plus. If you knock out the 5.6 million euros, that gives you a profit of 2.6 million euros. But again, because it's across all of the real estate at the end, if you take that over 11 years at, let's say, a 3% discount rate, that's 5% minus a 2% index in rent, then that gives us a net profit of just under 2 million euros. So we told the equity provider, making that decision to build a centralized system for clean renewable energy will net you a total profit over the project of 2 million euros. Sold, it stands. These are the buildings inside. As you can see, they're very high quality buildings. This is a building for Bosch and Siemens at Park 2020. Our centralized water system is, again, all of the gray water is collected in what's called a heliophyte filtration system. It's just the way nature behaves. It's cattails, grasses, and reeds, just like on the banks of a river. Gray water is filtered into there. The root structures of those plants filter the water. Gray water is then held into the central system, the canal, which then produces the energy. Black water at the end, there's space for an anaerobic digestive system. Once that's done, that filters the black water to gray water, gray back into the buildings, around and around the closed loop system goes. This is how it ends up looking at Bosch Siemens. And our biodiversity plan is actually quite neat. This won the it was done by an American landscape architect. It won the annual award for the Annual Society of Landscape Architects. It was pretty neat. I got to go to DC and pick up some kind of plaque and get a photo taken. And no sooner did we win that award than we actually balled up that plan and threw it in the bin. And the reason that we did that was because we came into contact with an organization called the Vlinderstichting, which is the Butterfly Association. And yes, in the Netherlands, even the butterflies have their own association that lobbies our government on their behalf. And we found that they told us that there were 3 critically endangered species of local butterflies, and we found that to be a horrible situation. So we redid the entire landscaping program so that it is all food sources and breeding grounds specifically for these critically endangered species of butterfly. You can see that it's much more of like a wildflower type of landscaping, and then it's filled with different pocket parks, each one for the different types of landscape for the butterflies. Cost us no money. In fact, the Vlinderstichting organized subsidies for us to purchase the plants with, so it was a more cost-effective strategy. The only difference is you say, I'll have that plant instead of that plant, but the net result is that you really have a very purpose-driven approach to how you build it. And here you can see some photos of the breeding grounds. We also have, during development, for the undeveloped plots, we had a social farm run by a nonprofit organization. The place, it provides jobs for documented refugees and for people with distance to the labor market. No herbicides, no pesticides. All of the food is then sold to the on-site restaurants. We produce way more food on the site than could be consumed. So we struck a deal with the local food bank where they could have all the food for free. And the only deal point was that it was actually had to be picked up in an EV. So that's another way that the site was actually generating. From our end, a site like this looks much better and sells much easier than a construction site with a lot of mud and dirt and so on and so forth. This is the largest collection of cradle-to-cradle certified materials in the world. We're very proud of that. That was very hard work, and Ignasi is going to follow and talk about how that was done. We actually used sort of the plan that said first that we want to inventory, screen, assess, and optimize. And of course, cradle to cradle is the only way that you can truly start optimizing and removing the toxicity out of the projects. We never considered ourselves a cradle to cradle inspired developer or a green developer or a sustainable developer. It was always high quality. We always went for quality, and sustainability for us was an indicator of quality. And this is an indicator of a high-quality building, because how can a building be quality if it poisons your people every single day that they're occupying it? That's not a quality building. So there are still not enough products on the market to build an entire building of this level of sophistication. So it's important that you keep assessors on site that help us to screen candidate materials. And that's what we used EIG for, and they were excellent in that. We could have a very reliable rating in about 2 weeks for a series of materials, and that helped us make conscious decisions on what we would have. In the very beginning of conceptual design and in sketch design, we already started indicating where those materials would be located. We started already mapping out where the potential toxicity could be located, for example, formaldehyde in the particle board. And we supplied all of this to the general contractor to help them make conscious decisions in their purchasing process. We're not saying you can't buy particle board. I don't like it. But you can't. But you are the construction people. That's your job. what I want you to do is make sure that you're buying particle board with no formaldehyde in it. And so it armed and equipped them with the information to go to their supply chain and start testing deeper in their supply chain for healthy, safe materials. It's a beautiful inside structure. And the human element is where we'll wrap up. This is, you can find in the World Green Building Council study on Poly Plantronics. You can see that this was their former office before they moved. This was their scores after they moved in. What's also interesting is you can see that it generated roughly 2.1 million euros in productivity enhancement for the organization. Their rent was less than 2.1 million euros, so that's a very interesting business case for them. They ended up buying their building instead of leasing it, so they were very happy about that. That also saved us over 600,000 in pre-financing costs. And for the design and build, I'll show you one more time. How am I doing on time? Huh? I'm overdone. How much time do we have until we have to go?
I wouldn't mind you wrapping up.
How about I wrap up just with this slide, because this is really the way that we got this project built. Is the Bosch Siemens came to us with a request for proposal of 10,000 square meters. In that first building, the rent was 200 euros a square meter, and that was a 10-year lease. We actually identified that we could house them with their growth on 7,500 square meters. The next thing to do was to identify that that was about 500,000 euros of savings per year in the rent price. Taking that over the 10-year lease agreement was a value creation for them of 5 million euros. Discounting it back at an NL bond rate at the time was about 3%, 3% and 2%. That gave us a profit to them of 3 million euros. We said, how about you take 1.5 million euros, go back to Munich and give it to your board of directors. They're going to give you a pat on the back and telling you you're doing a fantastic job in the Netherlands. And then you take the other 1.5 and invest it in a smaller building. And that's how we ended up getting the capital needed to then start really investing in this type of training and learning. So that was a way. Sorry that I went over time. I promise you the next one coming up is even more engaging than that. So without further ado, I'll bring on Ignasi Kubinja.
Okay, thank you, Owen. As you can see, in the Netherlands, they're really unpacking the process and having a good look at it all. In short, I think in the UK, we're sort of talking about it quite a lot and thinking about it. That was obviously doing it big time. Okay, now Ignasi is going to speak. Ignasi Kubinja, he co-founded Eco Intelligent Growth in 2005 with the purpose of implementing Cradle to Cradle. As a circular economy strategic advisor, Ignasi worked with companies like Titan Industries Interface, Stella McCartney, among others. And that's where I'm going to leave it, because we want to hear you for as long as possible. Over to you, Ignasi.
Where's my slide?
Slow, isn't he? There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm from Barcelona, so my English is probably not as fluent and as flashy as Owen. I'm not such a good showman either. So I go straight to the point. By the way, 10 years ago, I knew nothing about construction. I'm a biologist by education. And one of the points here is that one of the things circular economy needs is a lot of versatility in the ground. So Owen and I, we are very complementary because of this versatility thing. Okay? So I'm going to be focused on how we can drive change and increase the value for circularity through a cradle-to-cradle approach in regular projects. Because I was involved in the Part 2020 project at a certain extent, but that was not a standard project. There's a project from scratch, extremely ambitious, and it was, at that time, was really unique. So what I'm going to talk to you today is what you can do around the corner. So what is the value? I don't know if I'm speaking too loud because, no, it's okay, good. So definitely the value is not on a wasteful society. I mean, I don't know if you have seen the National Geographic issue of this month. It's the end of waste. The cradle-to-cradle people become from the perception that a wasteful society is a non-healthy society. And that's a very important point. Because the detail is in the evil is in the details, not the other way around, by the way. Huh? So, if we want to generate value for the whole system, what are the rules? What are the principles we have to follow here? And just by chance, I got this book in my hands back in 2003. It was totally unexpected. But I was coming from the food and pharmaceutical industry and from the supply chain side of the business, you know. So a lot of the examples and a lot of, the deep thinking in this book was something that I was finding in my regular job. Things like waste management, things like extra costs, things like quality issues, you name it. So Cradle to Cradle is good as an extremely strong idea because it's simple. And in the previous event, there was one of the lecturers said, simple things are the most complicated things. And she was right. Taking complexity into something tangible and that can be done is complicated. Yeah? So the universal principles are inspired by the way the biological systems work, and that was the direct relationship with my own career and personality, you know, because I was able to understand that. Waste equals food. Okay, there's no waste in an ecological system. We all know that. We need to use current solar income, clean and renewable energy. Buy it. Last but not least, very important, the butterfly thing, celebrate diversity. This is the little boy in the whole sustainability discussion, and this is the most important one, because we are not just talking about biodiversity, we're talking about cultural, conceptual, and biological diversity. So difficult things, put them simply, is what Bill and Michael did already quite a long way ago. And they said the fundamental thing about that is, can we fix up the current linear economy, and can we develop a paradigm shift based on a very simple approach, which is basically something that starts at the design table. How we design things, how we produce things, and how we use things. So very simple. We live in a system where we have biological systems, the biosphere, technical systems, the technosphere. Biological system, they have to feed back the biosphere, the technical nutrients, which is everything we have here, by the way. Everything which is not a biological nutrient by itself, so everything that cannot be compostable is the technical nutrient, because it's something that is a very valuable nutrient back to the industrial system. And this is the real fundamental of the whole cradle-to-cradle mindset. Don't mixing up things makes waste out of the system. So if we don't want to have waste, forget about hybrid monsters. Forget about things that they are very hard to fall apart, you know. So the value is in segregation and aggregation, right? So what is a circular economy? I like this one. Definitely is not a linear economy on a circle. I have seen a lot of fancy definitions about circular economy and a lot of fancy diagrams about circular economy. Hey, it's deep thinking about that. So definitely it's not linear on a fancy circle diagram, you know? So we need to go from here to here. People, they still talk about sustainability. We don't really talk about sustainability because sustainability is not good enough. We don't have a system that has been designed to sustain ourselves and to sustain the system where we live on. So we need a restorative system, not just a sustainability agenda. So in order to make it happen, we do it bottom up. I mean, we just learned from Owen. Owen was my master on trying to get things top down and how to go to the powerful guys that you just mentioned to to give them the difficult pill to swallow, which is, okay, what kind of investments and what kind of priorities they have to be set in order to make change happen in the right direction. So we start very little. We start at the molecule level. So we say Cradle to Cradle is a design framework from the molecule to the region. So all the way up, all the way down. And again, there's no circular economy without safety materials and a healthy system. First safe, then circular, not the other way around. Okay? So I'm coming from a long way. I co-founded my company in 2005. There was no Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There was no circular economy statement. But there were already some pioneers talking about circular economy and Cradle to Cradle already from the 70s. Yeah? So we were born in 2005. I started working with Bill McDonough in 2006. I met with Owen in 2007, 2008. And we became a general assessor for Cradle to Cradle certification in 2013. 2 years earlier, there was the founding of the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, both at the same time, by the way. And coming from that time, this is the different landscape now. So the landscape now is telling us, hey, if you want to move the needle, you need to tell things in a different way, and you need to talk to different people. I've been talking to general contractors, real estate developers, engineers, architects for a decade. I need to talk to the investors guys now. I need to put myself out of the comfort zone and building a new language for investors. Because the new deal from policymakers and from the private sector is about how we can mobilize this trillion of euros that should be in place to make these things happen. And we can leave no one behind that. So the social agenda is as important as the other agenda. So Owen just mentioned the butterfly building. You're going to see a picture about that. And the first inspirational thing, the first inspirational motto for me as a biologist was, okay, can we design and build buildings like trees and cities like forests? Can we make buildings having a positive impact, not a less bad solution for human beings and for the landscape? That might sound very inspirational, and it was very inspirational, but it was for real. We're talking about how we can enrich the soil, how we can clean the water, how we can produce more oxygen, and how we can consume CO2 through the building and through the building systems. And then all of a sudden, I met a Dutch guy with a little bit of American background, and he said to me, hey, you know what? The first question for a real estate developer is how we do fantastic projects with friends. So relationship is very critical. It's not a joke. The most important part in a circular economy is open-mindedness and relationship. How you build relationships. I'm not the guy to talk to the construction workers, because the construction workers, they look at me as, this is a crazy guy. I know nothing about putting a brick or masonry, piling up things, I'm doing things the other way around, by the way. So, how we can build circular building value, and how we can build value from buildings to the society. So, here's the thing. I see a building as a material bank, or as a bank of materials. And in 2012, we joined our sister company today, which is Grupo Constructia, because what we were missing in all our approach was implementation. And why we were missing implementation? Because of the lifespan of new building construction. Because in order to have feedback information, we had to wait for 40, 50, or 60 years. And by the way, if the financial situation was bad in the Netherlands, you could imagine what was the situation after the real estate bubble in Spain, you know? It was even worse than that. So there was not a real incentive for people to make any kind of decision there. So we said, we will focus on retrofitting existing commercial buildings. And we will start by the fast-moving goods within a building. And then some years later, and we were defining a roadmap with this company, not for that company, but with this company. General contractor company defining a roadmap for becoming a service, whole service of circular service provider in the building sector. And then after some years, I found out that, okay, we need to talk to the big guys at the top floor, you know, which are the financial guys. And I was looking at how to make accountability of circular buildings through cradle-to-cradle products. And we were talking about things like material health, material utilization, the way we use water, the way we use energy, and the way we generate social fairness. But that was not captured by the financial world. So the first thing I found out, and this is a very interesting example that, by the way, is accessible, is ABN AMRO, which is a bank in the new financial area in Amsterdam, correct me if I'm wrong. They were developing something that is really odd for the Spanish culture. The Dutch people, they call it community of practice. In Spain, we practice on community, but we don't do community of practice, you know? So this is really strange for our culture. So the first thing we have to do is to change our mindset, you know, and to see how we can share knowledge and how we can share experience for the good. But the financial world is still thinking that cradle to cradle is a single issue thing, is a limited scope. And the first thing we say about cradle to cradle is this is holistic management. So why finance perceives cradle to cradle as a single issue instead of a holistic management? And this is the big challenge here. I mean, Einstein said, facts are facts, perceptions are realities. So we need to build a new set of perceptions, you know? So if anybody knows anything about cradle to cradle can be anything but single. So it was born multi-attribute, multi-industrial, and multi-stakeholder. And the reason why we do cradle to cradle, and I'm quoting JFK, by the way, where he was bringing the man to the moon, is because it's hard. So that's why we do cradle to cradle, because it's hard. So in order to make this comprehensive approach to everybody, and those are the things that have been already mentioned here, we have to put design, modularity, flexibility, and resilience in the first place. We need to start by selecting, this is what we call material parsimony, what are the healthy materials. Not only healthy in the short term, not only healthy because of compliance of the local regulation, but on the broader sense of health, you know? How those materials, they can have a real positive impact, not throughout the end of life of the product. I don't believe in end of life. We're talking end of use or next use of the product. How we can generate abundance in every single decision we make. And then we need tools, material passports. I remember talking to Owen some time ago about a material passport. He said, okay, yeah, well, okay, I don't really get it. Well, it's been a long time. I can tell you now, the material passport is really instrumental to make this happen. Why? Because as a biologist, as a taxonomist, there are two things that identify waste. First thing is safety. And the second thing is identification. All living species, they need to be identified to have value in a human's world. Not in their world, but for human people, you know? So all of a sudden we decided, and this is the second part, the second block of my presentation, we need a special methodology for that. Methodology that comes from the construction world, so lean manufacturing into lean construction, what we call efficiency, what we call risk mitigation, what we call procedures, what we call, execution, the real stuff. That's why I was rolling up my sleeves today. And then put it in the right context. So what is the purpose to do that? What is the value short, mid, and long term to do that? And we were developing what we call this, the Lean to Cradle material passport. At the same time, we were assessing the customer satisfaction through the Leasman survey. So we were getting a third-party validation for that. How good, how well the building or the space dialogues with the people, with the occupants, We were looking into real data on indoor air quality qualification. Indoor air quality is one of the drivers for enhanced customer satisfaction. And we were doing a circular diagnosis on those existing buildings as well. And what we found is that, for instance, in our own headquarters, we had a pretty high number, of identification level, cyclability of the products, and how many cradle-to-cradle products were already certified or validated, that was only 1 year ago. This is one of the highest probably standards in the market now. It's not a very big. Building. It's only 1,000 square meters, but it's our own office, and it's scalable, and it's replicable. Okay, so well, these are the kind of things we do. This is the scorecard we have developed to implement these things. This scorecard is crossing data from different green building certification and cradle to cradle. And we use cradle to cradle as the qualification approach. Because a lot of circularity speaks about quantity, about how many $1 trillion are needed and what is the business opportunity for circularity. But I hear very little about quality. Owen just mentioned we are talking quality here, So identification, cyclability, future value, and I would like to share this 1-minute video about, Is the sound?
In traditional construction, buildings are designed and built to perform a specific function, and when they are no longer needed, they are demolished. Almost every part of it becomes waste. When talking about circular construction, structures are conceived to have the ability to adapt to new uses, to be refurbished, and if needed, disassembled. This way, materials and components preserve their value and quality for further uses in never-ending cycles. To maintain the value of construction materials throughout a long circular path, they need an identification document with their complete profile, available to all stakeholders anytime. We create a digital copy of the building, identifying all of its materials, capture the materials value, increase a building's overall net present value, and manage future opportunities.
So what are the drivers? In any conversation you might have about circularity and the new trends in sustainability is all about, or it's mainly about transparency and traceability, We are identifying our buildings at 100 ppm level, so 100 milligram per kilo of material, product. That's really detailed, And we need this kind of detail not because we have nothing to do the whole day, but this is because we need to keep our promises. And the only way to keep your promises and talk to the financial guys is when you can prove that your statement is 100% correct, Still, we cannot prove that. We are still on the 90s and 95%, but we are aiming for that. And we've been one of the first companies, for sure the first company in Spain, thinking about what is going to be not only the next use, what are the different pathways for materials in buildings. And we've been developing things like material and energy flow analysis and using this Sankey diagram type of thing in order to illustrate, what are our estimations for the material flow, okay? So now I'm entering the last part of my presentation. So value is a very emotional thing. Value is different for you and for you, So what we just found is that we have two kind of values when we talk buildings. It's the value to the society. So what is the cost for the society of using specific strategies? We would like this to turn this cost into value, so a positive overall impact. And the other thing is the short-term value, which is the value to business, is what Owen was mentioning about yields, rental prices, and things like that. If we don't have the combination of both, we don't have a positive agenda. That's very clear. And we need to put, why? Because the value to business is short-term, and the value to society is mid-long term. And one of the main hurdles of the sustainability agenda is everybody's talking about the mid-long term, while business is talking short-term. And when we talk about politics, I don't tell you what kind of lifespan we're talking about. So, and this is a graph, I don't know if you can read it, but it's, the message here is most of the decisions from the financial world are being taken by agnostic people. So the business as usual thing, they want, show me the numbers, show me the figures, show me the risk. And then on the other end of the chain, then we have the philanthropic people, the NGOs. We are neither business as usual, we're not philanthropic. We want to develop a business case that can be tangible, and we want to talk to the impact investment people. Because what we are aiming for is for a positive impact in the end of the day. So we are doing retrofitting building and new buildings, and we are basically estimating what will be the residual value evolution. This is something that has been mentioned by Owen already. What is the role of rental pricing on the whole balance sheet for a business case, In the value to society, we are partnering with KPMG. They have a tool they call True Value. It's still very much focused on life cycle assessment. So it doesn't really capture the whole value of circularity. And that's why we have now a collaboration with them, because we would like to develop something beyond that, So our buildings, our spaces, they are to be safe and healthy for people and the environment, secure for investors, profitable for operators, and inclusive for a society. And we cannot do it alone. That's an important lesson learned. General contractors, they work in silos. If the real estate developers, they work in silos, general contractors, they work in super silos. That's a fact, right? So we need a lot of different people with a lot of different skills to bring them to the cause. And I'm just going to share a few examples of what we have delivered already. Just for you, when we started this journey with this company, it was a relatively small company. General contractors in Spain, they are big. They are still big. It was relatively small in the retrofitting business, 25 million euro. The budget for next year, after 8 years, is 150 million euro. We are not selling because of circular economy. Otherwise, I will be, jumping here, But the methodology and the new way of thinking within the company and our relationship with our stakeholders is driving the change. So we start with something like that. It's one of the biggest real estate developers in Spain. This is what we call a Socimi company. It's a strong client of ours, They have buildings of rating from 5,000 square meters to 30,000 square meters, or even bigger than that. So, well, the first thing we do is a circular diagnose. How much of this, Duncan, can be used in a different building? Very little. Quantity-wise, you still have a case. Quality-wise, very little. So in order to go from there to here and to here, which is our own headquarters, and this is what we're telling these guys, if you take a building like that, we will start by doing a circular diagnosis. We will try to find out what is the potential and how we can monetize this potential in the short term. But then we will develop a different agenda, because we don't want to have the same stock of buildings in 30 years from now, right? So this is how complex data management is. Combining short, mid, and long-term things, and having a third-party company like KPMG verifying this. And we're also doing for new buildings. This is the first circular economy design hub in Spain. This is near the Barcelona airport. If there's anyone interested in the building here, give me a call, okay? The most important thing about this is the little, text here on your left. Open book policy. What is an open book? Open book is we are taking a project from an architectural firm, we are deconstructing that, and we are opening the margins to everyone in the process. That was the only way it worked here. I remember being in Wasteville in Amsterdam 2 months ago, and the main remark from the architects in Amsterdam is, okay, this all looks very beautiful, but it's more expensive. And it's going to be always more expensive. That's not the case with us, guys. We are the general contractor. I promise you, if it goes more expensive than 2-3%, we're not going to do it. So we can keep costs down if all the stakeholders, they speak the same language in the arena. So they open up the books, including the real estate guy, by the way. Well, here the real estate is a very small company. I think with the big guys, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, you know? So, and these are the kind of results we can get. And this is not yet, this is a core and shell building. It's not yet interior design. We will expect productivity increases, productivity which is linked to the customer satisfaction of double figures. Yeah? I mean, this is net present value. This is money back to the pocket very rapidly. Not only for the real estate developer, but also for the operational company, you know? So identification, and then, and I'm finishing with this. Well, I have one more slide. And this is for the financial people. In my world, plus 7% or plus 8% yield increase or plus 1% figure is relatively small. But in the financial world, I just learned that this is very big money. If we can prove that this happens, and you can back it up with numbers, this is a game changer, you know? And this is the reason why I think it's time for action now, and to go to the powerful guys and to tell them, hey, we are not talking sustainability anymore. We're talking productivity, we are talking profitability, we are talking legacy, we are talking being in the right side of the equation, you know? This little snake happened in our new office. This is how the office looked. And by the way, we got the highest Leesman index in all our projects because we are learning by doing, which is almost 90%, which is a very big number in terms of customer satisfaction. So the lessons learned is that we have to overcome things as they come. We need a lot of transparency. We need to build up the incentives in the right place at the right time. And we need to be as granular as possible with information. But we also need to tackle climate change. And material management accounts for almost 50%, according to McKinsey and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, on the climate change tackling. So I'm not going to extend myself on that, but we also need a new language of carbon. We need to address carbon in a different way. It's not about carbon footprint. Carbon is not the enemy. When I see things like, okay, I'm competing for zero, what the hell is competing for zero? I've never been in a competition for zero in my life. So I'm competing for 100 or for 1,000, not for zero. So, I mean, this is not about a zero carbon economy. We need to decarbonize the energy part, but recarbonize the materials part. So we need to create, and get ready for that, the new circular carbon economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ignasi. Brilliant presentation. Thank you for that. Can I call Owen and Charlene up onto the stage? If you could take a seat, there are microphones there. That covered so much information, answered so many questions, and maybe raised a couple. So I just wondered if there's anybody in the audience that has a question for any of the speakers. Oh, all right. Okay, I'll try and get it going. I mean, my observation is you guys are really unpacking it in a sort of 360-degree way from the macro to the micro, and you've sort of done it. How do you communicate that to other countries? I mean, it's really, we're in the UK here, and we're in a situation here where our local authorities have declared, 75% of our local authorities have declared a climate and ecological emergency, and are all wanting to be net zero carbon, whatever that means. They think that's the thing to declare. I mean, how do you unpack that and move that forward and do something positive so we really can reduce the consumption of stuff? Because that, from my point of view, that's what the construction industry needs to do. So, Owen, perhaps.
Yeah, so I would really start to say that it's like Ignasi said, it's not necessarily about a net zero approach. I would say that, okay, that's a starting point, and if that's the conversation that we want to start, but that can't be the final conversation that we're going to have. So if we're looking at how do we systematically reduce harmful impacts of our carbon footprint or our system, or our economic system on society, that's 50% of the equation, and less than 50% of the value. The actual conversation that we need to start getting to is what are the types of decisions that we had that are going to, like Ignasi said, that are going to be regenerative and restorative to our economies, to our ecosystems, and start really understanding what the links of those two things are. So I would start to say that that's a great place to start. Number one thing I've always noticed is that when people have great ideas, and even when they think they have great ideas, don't tell them they have a bad idea, because they're never going to listen to the next thing that you start to say. So I would start to say, this is a good start. What's next? And what do you do when you're successful with a zero carbon economy? What's next after that? And where are you going to go? So that's the way that I would really start to approach from, let's say, a consulting or a coaching perspective to municipal figures. And then I would also start to tell them that they have the responsibility to the citizens to make sure that value is being driven into society. Indeed, that the value creation for society is the most important part. Right now, in terms of business, what we do is we privatize value creation and we socialize risk. Is that we put risk into the society, we put risk into the way in terms of poisoning waterways and ground and soil conditions. We actually need to look at how can we drive value via the economic system to those areas as well.
Ignasi?
Well, that's why. Can you hear me?
Maybe share it.
That's why Owen and myself, we are that complementary, you know, because he's right. I mean, starting the point by saying someone that your net zero strategy is not the right phrase. It's probably not very smart from a building standpoint, you know. So we need to, to put the things together. I think the idea about a circular carbon economy, which is very much embedded and is very critical for the built environment, is really an idea of, is a very inclusive idea. And it's very inclusive because we are putting value on things that biology does already, but we as human beings, we are not doing. And this is the value for the different quality of carbon. We want to get rid of the fugitive carbon, and it was mentioned by Bill in his diagram, because this is what carbon emissions are all about. But we need to have durable carbon and living carbon. We need to have living carbon back to the soil, because even in terms of a carbon sink, this is one of the most important strategies. And we also have to design products and assemble products to become durable carbon, because when I'm listening to people talking about a new plastic economy, about how we have to get rid of plastics, for instance, which plastics are, basically they are carbon molecules. And for instance, a timber structure is 50% carbon. How we deal with this highly valuable carbon? The last thing we want is to throw it away. So that's why we need to take the conversation to the next level. And people like Owen, which are in a big real estate business, they are going to be very helpful to do that, because they are connecting the dots between some of the provocative statements and how things have to be implemented.
Charlene, did you want to answer it?
We're just very aware that in the UK, the conversation is probably just starting. And I think one of the things that we at 540 World anyway are finding is a really key feature is that we can actually look at these different territories that are actually ahead of the game. We can bring the metrics in, we can bring the biology in. And if you talk about butterflies to some people, the investors will fall asleep at the table. If you're only talking figures, you're missing a big part of the conversation. So we are really saying that it has to be a holistic approach. We have to look at evidence-based metrics, and we have to look at the top down, right down to the small microbes that live in the soil. We can't ignore any of that, otherwise we're just not asking the right questions, and we're not going to get a sort of a holistic solution. Right. But having said that, what Ignasi said earlier for us has been really key, and what we've driven in the last 6 months has not happened in the last 15 years in the UK, where the uptake of interest is just going through the roof. And so we will bring those solutions through all of these companies working together.
Thank you. Oh, we have a question. Let me hold it and I'll...
It's a question for Owen, really. Well, it's two maybe. One is really looking at traditional ways of building buildings. How much longer did it take you when you were looking at circular economy in Holland to actually design and build and complete the building compared with what you may have otherwise put in there? Second question is, JLL is a massive global organisation. Is it looking to roll out this process elsewhere?
Yeah, so let me unpack them front to back. We always met every single one of the development times and delivery times, so it didn't take any more time. I do want to say that in the very beginning, one of the things that we had to do was we had to make capital investments on learning. So we had to really start understanding that we didn't have all the answers and we needed to make investments in learning. One of the things that we did was also understand, like Ignasi said, that learning needs to permeate the entire production process. So we started paying for training, and as a developer, that was then capitalized in the assets that we were constructing. So we were a little bit more expensive in the beginning. The rent increases and the smaller buildings were covering that, so we were always within our hurdle rates and targets. But we did have a higher construction cost in the beginning, and that was because we needed to learn. We basically took the construction company and we said, everybody that's going to work on that project has to receive this training, and we're going to pay for it all. And everybody, but you can bring anybody else you want as a construction company and train that. And train them for free as well too. And so once we got everybody's learning on page, the construction time was pretty much tight. The great thing that we also had in terms of an area development, I would say that we were quite lucky with that, was we had about 12 buildings that we could put together, and we didn't have to try and be 100% perfect in the first building. The objective, the most important thing is just get going. Don't try and be perfect and never start. So just get going, understand that it's not going to be perfect. Is this project perfect now? No, it's not. But it's better than it was at day one. So just get going, understand, start training your people, deliver on time, and then start to just, pick up what you learned and put it into the next project.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes. And there was someone else over here put their hand up before. Otherwise, I'm going to go to this side.
We got over there. And while you're walking to her, yes, this is front and center from our global CEO to our EMEA CEO, and we will see a lot of activity coming from JLL and all 96,000 employees.
In London, we have quite a problem with community consultation, and that's really a kind of taboo, I think, in real life, in practice. How are developers or these new projects, circular economy and cradle to cradle, going to actually transition into those new projects? Because right at the moment, communities have been let down with not having commitment to actually deliver what's been designed in the first place to get planning permission. And I feel like that sort of patience for those is completely gone. So how do you rebuild a sense of trust in real consultations?
Yeah, good point, because Ignasi talked a lot about sharing, openness, collaboration.
Yeah. I don't know all the specifics on London. I can tell you that I'm from Barcelona, so it's also quite a high-dense city, and we are facing some similar problems. I think the problem is how you define quality and how you can achieve a certain kind of quality. It's not only quality in terms of luxury items, so it's not only quality in terms of, how efficient you can be. It's how you can deliver quality to the community, you know. In the cradle-to-cradle world, we say, and this cannot be done overnight, by the way, we say we need to design for abundance. And I think this is the real thing. I mean, we live in a world where constraints and limitations are driving the big money makers. In a world for abundance, there's no limited, should not be limited access to the basics, and should be more, things should be more affordable in the mid-long term, you know. Probably not always in the short term, but in the mid-long term. I'll give you an example. If we look at the cost of very basic things like partition walls, they're all in our layouts, right? We've been talking about partition walls, gypsum board, glass pane base, timber base, all this kind of stuff. In the kind of buildings we do, partition walls is probably 10% weight basis of the thing. We are trying to develop now systems because the lifespan of an office building in Barcelona is about 5 years. So we are trying to get a community involved in things like providing partition wall as a product as a service thing. So then we get something very basic, which doesn't have a lot of head space on top of the margin making, into a community thing. And we have, by the way, we have to overcome some of the regulation barriers, because only 10 years ago, a general contractor was not allowed to do that. We don't want to be a kind of a reservoir of materials. We want to disseminate the knowledge of what is embedded in those materials. So our database are going to be open access, open source, once we make them running perfectly.
Okay, Owen wants to say something.
So I've just had a little bit of this explained to me, and I want to be able to see you as I talk to you. I think one of the things that I've heard is that on the front end, we have these charrette and community consultations, and then on the back end, what's delivered is not necessarily what the community has been promised, right? If that's what I understand, and it sounds like in the value engineering phase, which what the heck is value engineering? We end up cutting all the value out because it's too expensive. So it's not value engineering, it's destroying value. And so the issue that I see coming out of this is in the purchasing and tendering process. If you look at, if we as as a developer or any type of community puts out and says, these are my technical specifications, when you tender that out into the community, all the way down the supply chain, everyone's trying to hit the lowest level of quality for the cheapest price. And all the way down, everyone is compromising quality. So I think in terms of tendering, this is where Ignasi comes in, and we did this as well too, is open book tendering. So you can see really this is what everything costs in the building. And as a developer, it's about maximize the value that you can create within the budget you specify. Because at the end, if I save 2%, what the heck does that mean if I destroy 30% of the value and I actually end up increasing potential failure costs within the project, which are going to be more expensive in the long run, not only to me, but to the society and the community. So from that perspective, the objective should be in tendering and purchasing, I have $1.2 million to spend on facade, spend all the $1.2 million and give me the highest quality that I can get for the $1.2 million and not give me $1.1 million for a cheaper building and let me save $100,000. So I think your answer really is in your public procurement systems, your tendering, and that entire supply chain of how value is extracted from it, not created from it.
Thank you. We're going to have to end it there. Can we have a final round of applause for our speakers? Incredibly inspiring. Lots of detail, lots of energy and compassion. It was really inspiring. Thank you very much.